There are many public speakers and analysts who have partial picture of the overall geopolitical and financial system, but only very few analysts are able to communicate about how these parts fit into a large whole. How would you go about the transfer from your knowledge and insight to the younger generation, which is vital for this knowledge to become mainstream? In other words, when is your book coming out?
My book is not coming out. Every month I have 2 reports for the Hat Trick Letter. I don't need a book. I have a newsletter. I'm now about to start issue number 155. If you want to pass on this knowledge, read my Hat Trick Letters going backwards.
So this next question is related to the previous. Throughout human history, the experience of elders accumulated over a lifetime of learning and observation has assured to the survival of those who depended on that knowledge and experience. But today's so-called Western civilizations discard everything coming from those who have lived for decades and who are in a position to discern the reality. What can be done to revert the brainwashing of so many young people? Could there be a future circumstances where this occurs very rapidly?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. That's a very big, tough one. Let me give 2 answers to that. First is, we must go back to basics. What I call Reich economics is Keynesian nonsense. It's just faulty economics. It teaches about a debt foundation for currencies and a debt-based system for economic growth. I don't buy it at all. I much prefer an equity-based system for economic growth and a gold basis for the currency system. I think that is much more sound, and if you look back to 100-year periods, you find the greatest growth in human history was the 100 years before 1971, even though it included world wars and a depression. Okay, we need to get away from Reich economics, which teaches the economic growth is always positive. We need to get away from the same bullshit economics that teaches that the consumer price index is always between 1.5% and 3%. We need to get away from bullshit economics. We need to get away from bullshit science. All the global warming, many of the reports and documents and research were paid and falsified. We need to get back to basics. And when it comes to the individuals, we need to get away from constant wasting of time with the social networks like Facebook, like LinkedIn, like WhatsApp across Latin America. We need to get away from it. It's wasting time. We need to get away from the video games. It's wasting time. People are not reading books and novels. They're not reading about adventures. Like when I was a kid, it was, Robinson Crusoe and Treasure Island and, Animal Farm. And when I was older, it was the Crichton books, like Andromeda Strain. It was the, what's the lawyer's name who wrote The Firm? Gresham novels. I don't play video games. I don't do solitaire. I have friends who say, Jim, you know that solitaire game? I stop and say, no, I don't know. I don't play any of that. I'm reading articles about what's going on in the economy. What are you doing? Wasting your time with video games? Is that why you don't know shit about what's going on? Okay, I'm not part of the social networks. I do text messages, but they're mainly to arrange for meetings with people. They're mainly for clearing up things regarding details in business transactions and details and all kinds of stuff. And sure, I waste a little time, but it's usually when I'm flat on my back, it's after 9 and I'm looking to fall asleep soon. I don't spend all day. I love these pictures of a file of 15 young adults walking over a cliff, each one doing a text message on their smartphone. Okay, we need to get back to reading. We need to get back to studying science. Americans need to study economics. They need to study math. They need to study science more. I'm aghast that many high schools have only a 2-year math requirement now. We expect to be competitive with that? I don't think so.
What are the latest updates regarding the banking sectors in Europe, as the derivatives effects seem to be stretching to breaking point, yet disappearing with a bandage with inevitable QE? What is the final unavoidable snap going to be that can't be bandaged in your view?
I'm not sure. I actually thought it was going to be Deutsche Bank failure. I actually thought it was going to be the Italian banking system failure. But you know, when you're dealing with patches and fake money, it's infinite in the potential volume. I have a personal belief, based on comments within my team of colleagues, that the Fed has been monetizing something on the order of $3 to $20 trillion per month. I know that sounds outrageous. They admit to 40 to 50 billion a month. I think it's easily double that. Then you factor in the BRICS nations, Belgium, Luxembourg, Ireland, Caribbean, and Switzerland. They have almost exactly double the volume of the Fed itself. Then bring in the European Central Bank. Okay, what I'm saying is, whatever they admit, it's at least triple. Based on Bank of England, European Central Bank, the BRICS, which are basically Fed small outposts, and the Fed itself. So maybe 3 to 4 times of what they admit. So that's 100, 120, 130 billion a month. They don't talk about ever the derivatives that they cover and redeem. The hint that they've redeemed a lot of them is that about 5 or 6 years ago, they admitted that there was about $1,400 trillion worth of derivatives out there. Now they estimate, and they claim it's from a more accurate count from their accounting, that it's now something like 700 or 650 trillion in derivatives. I reason that since QE began in 2012, which was 5 years ago, they've been monetizing in the trillions every month the bank derivatives. If they've reduced $700 trillion in 70 months, I reason they've reduced 10 trillion a month. Now, it's very hard to dispute that simple coffee table mathematics. We're not talking about heavy-duty math. This is simple arithmetic. They've reduced 70 trillion in dollar worth of derivatives since 2011 and 12. How did that happen? It's not from better accounting, because they usually have more falsified accounting. Just take a look at all the accounting with respect to mortgage bonds and the lawsuits. Okay, what will bring it down, Lawrence? I'm going to resort to the answer that The Voice has given, because we asked him the same question. He said, it's not going to be something you can point to. It'll be something that's unexpected. It'll be something on a list of things that you consider potentials. I'm adding this. Maybe it'll be the Portuguese banking system that fails. I don't know. Maybe it'll be some very large orders and on gold that reveal the fraud of the futures contract. Maybe it'll be a legal challenge that's permitted by the Trump administration of the COMEX contract fraud. It's going to be something we don't know. We can't say, well, it'll be that, or that. We don't know. It's going to be on a list of 30 different items where we don't know. I don't know what it's going to be. It's going to be a fracture. It could actually be something related to the U.S. Treasury bonds, because what I'm hearing more and more is that the global dumping that's turning out to be now on a last 12-month basis of more than $400 billion. That means in the last 12 months, the last year, we've had over $400 billion worth of Treasury bonds dumped. That volume is getting so big that the pressure on the derivatives for the Treasury bonds is getting acute. They cannot handle it anymore with the derivatives. And every time they do a fake rate hike, what they're doing is they're increasing the leverage of these banks and the derivatives. Just think of it as the Sears Tower. It's no longer 110 stories, it's 150 stories, and they reduce the size of the base. So they're adding risk every time they amplify their leverage. And I assure you, they're amplifying their leverage every single month. So they're inviting a disaster. I don't know where it's going to come from, Lawrence. I just don't know. And I'm not ashamed to say I don't know.
So inevitability it's exactly like a Jenga game. You remove the pieces, you stack that tower, but the tower's still going to come down.
Yes. And that what's the name of that? Jenga?
Jenga.
I prefer to think of it as something very much parallel to that, as the Sears Tower is now higher and they reduced the base. Okay. It's still a big rectangle at every floor.
Okay, moving on to, what do you think is JP Morgan's intent with its 550 million ounces of physical silver? Have you heard of any currency backing taking place in silver?
I have a rather simple potential explanation of that. JP Morgan sold its headquarters to Chinese property conglomerate. That was 2 years ago. It was part of a complex deal. I think it involved an element to the U.S. government debt default. The indisputable part is that JP Morgan's headquarters was purchased by the Chinese property conglomerate. That is a fact. The Chinese now own the JP Morgan gigantic private vault that's something like 10 stories underground in Manhattan, South Manhattan. When I learned about the 500 million ounce silver, I'm not sure whether to call it inventory or ownership or claims by JP Morgan. I did a little research, and my conclusion was they're acting as an agent to supply silver to China, which has realized through its industrial expansion. Now, keep in mind, China has expanded its industry since about 2002, 3, and 4. That means they've got a good 12, 13 years of industrial expansion in China. They have a huge reserves, foreign reserves, as a result. But in the process of that expansion, they might have exhausted a great deal of their silver stockpile. Given the fact that JP Morgan is their frickin' bitch, my guess is that JP Morgan is now their agent to replenish the Chinese silver stockpile. If there's a currency that's going to be backed by silver, it will be Mexico and their peso. Let's move on.
What information are you hearing regarding the precious metals markets and available stockpiles moving mainly east?
Well, you know, we had last April, 2016, the Shanghai Gold Exchange open up, and they soon afterwards issued an RMB gold contract, a futures contract. That's big, big news. Okay, that is a sign, along with the Shanghai group entering the gold fix. That's the markets moving east. Very clear. The Shanghai gold market, their RMB gold contract, and participation in, you could call it the London fix, but it's really more like a gold fix that is taking place now in some respects in Shanghai. As for stockpiles moving east, oh gosh, I love telling this quick story. I got a phone call from The Voice telling me, this was March of 2012. He said, starting this month, there is 1,000 tons of gold being moved from London to China every single month. That went on for the rest of 2012, all of 2013, and all of 2014, for a total of over 30 months. That's 30,000 tons of gold moved from London to China. Now, if you're wondering what source was that, was it all London-based gold? No. It was Vatican and Basel, Switzerland also. So think of it as Basel, Vatican, and London got depleted of a lot of gold that went to China. And The Voice told me it did not end entirely after 2014, but it has been a much lower volume. And I asked him, is this to back the Eurasian trade zone's new currency systems, the gold-backed RMB, the gold-backed eventually ruble? And he said, yes. Yes. The gold-backed RMB, yes. So when you hear reports that China has over 30,000 tons of gold, think of that as being a conservative figure because they've been holding their own mine output for the last 15 years. That's 6,000 or 8,000 tons, maybe more. They've been buying in the open market through Australia. That's another 6, 8, 10,000 tons. I believe China has something on the order of 40 to 50,000 tons ready to back, I'm not going to say RMB currencies, I'm going to say global currencies. I believe it's entirely possible that the Chinese will do a lease of gold to Germany so that Germany will take the existing gold that they do have in reserves, plus some Chinese lease gold, and come up with the new gold-backed Nordic euro that will separate them from the Southern European wrecked, bankrupt, insolvent pigs nations. So there's a lot of gold moving east, and there's a lot of power for the market moving east. All right.
Okay, Jim, we're going to move on to some questions from the subscribers now.
Yeah.
This is from Gary. Jim, what are your thoughts on these precious metal analysts out charting technicals and basing predictions using fundamentals, whilst these markets are based on fakery and manipulation?
I would say that any chart analysis that has a perspective for gold, chart of gold, that has a perspective of less than 3 years is mostly nonsense. That's why since 2011 and 12, I have very few charts. Now, there's a kind of an undropped shoe there. What about charts that are over 3 years? I think they have meaning. I've had an interesting exchange in emails, including charts, with a couple of fellows who are Elliott Wave advocates. And they have pointed out to me that much of the big turns in gold and silver in the last 3 or 4 years have been very much consistent with their chart analysis, Elliott Wave style, and they're pointing to a change in the wind that they said could happen as soon as January, could happen as late as June. But when you're dealing with a 20-year chart, you don't make a big distinction between 1 and 4 months. So they believe that the bottom has been put in for both gold and silver, and we're about to embark on a very powerful Elliott Wave leg upward that could take the gold price, say, to $2,500 or higher. Could take the silver price to $30 to $50 or higher. So long-term charts make sense from the technical analysis. Shorter and intermediate term charts make less sense because there can just be yet another pounce on the gold market where in 1 hour they sold 6 months worth of global mine output in the most corrupt and imaginable style right in front of our faces with full impunity. So long-term charts make sense. And I'm very excited by this Elliott Wave chart that the fellow passes my way. I hope he's listening, because it points to sometime in the near future. I'm not talking like, by the end of the year. I think in the next several months we might see the beginning of a legitimate move up in gold. And I'm always uncomfortable putting timing on things. But in the near term, whether it's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 months, I don't know, we're going to see this movement in the gold market probably head up, and some of the biggest impetus could be Donald Trump. It could be Trump saying he doesn't like the strong dollar, which he's already started to say. It could be Trump with his economic advisor, Judy Shelton, a gold standard advocate. It could be their movements toward the gold standard. It could be steps toward issuance of the new Scheich dollar, which would have to be devalued. By the way, a new Scheich dollar is very consistent with the Trump administration. If he comes out with a new Scheich dollar and says, We want this thing devalued 30% out of the gate because that'll make our exports more competitive and easier to expand, say, 8,000, 20,000, 30,000 new businesses per year in the United States. That would work very well in sync with his reindustrialization of the United States, which the neocons have worked totally in the opposite direction. Neocons are about financial engineering and economic destruction. So, very interesting what's coming.
Will the power shift east to China and Russia after the petrodollar meets its inevitable, horrific death by derivatives debt execution? And what do you expect to rise from the ashes, especially here in London?
Will the power shift? It's already shifting to China and Russia. The petrodollar began its death, I think, 2 years ago. If you look at the Saudi ownership of treasury bonds, you'll see that starting in 2015, it's in decline. If you look at an oil price chart relative to, versus superimposed upon Saudi treasury bond ownership, you'll see that there is a break at the end of 2014. I like pointing to an event. Remember the UBS crime scene established by the United States government, the Justice Department. They claimed that UBS was involved with all kinds of criminal activity regarding secret tax dodging accounts in Switzerland and lots of other things. So it was very interesting because the U.S. government was exerting its jurisdiction over the Swiss banking system, which is totally crazy. So I dug deeper. What's the real story here? And the voice provided it for me. He said very large bullion banks are under control by UBS. And after the U.S. came in with its declaration of criminal activity, part of the settlement was that the U.S. and the London bankers had control and access over the bullion banks where they stole the Arab gold. I'm thinking they stole 1,000 tons or more. Then a year later, a year and a half later, the Credit Suisse, like a redux, because they have smaller bullion banks holding gold. Redux on the crime scene regarding hidden tax dodging accounts and all that. So the settlement again involved U.S. banks, U.S. government. Well, yeah, U.S. banks control the U.S. government. The U.S. government declared its exerted control over the Credit Suisse asset base and all its deposits, access over its data, like account data, and they stole the rest of the Arab gold, primarily Saudi. It's UAE and Saudi gold, United Arab Emirates and Saudi gold. Okay, so the petrodollar has been dying for quite some time. It's a long process. You cannot have 40 years of a petrodollar and then 3 months of its dissolution. You need a few years, and I think we only have another year or two left for complete dissolution and removal and cancellation and dismantling.
Disentanglement.
Disentanglement through dismantlement. Mm-hmm. Good. The petrodollar is in the process now of being duplicated in the form the Russians selling oil and gas to China and being paid in RMB currency. The Russians then turn around and use the Shanghai Gold Exchange, with probably futures contracts involved also, and they convert their RMB to gold. That is the new Petro Yuan, the Petro RMB. The new Petro RMB is coming into view. Russians sell energy to China and use the RMB currency to buy gold in Shanghai. It is that simple. I think that is going to emerge as the structural basis for the gold trade note eventually. So it's happening right now, Lawrence. How do I expect to rise from the ashes in London? They're going to make lots and lots of deals with Russia. They're going to make deals with China, but they cannot compete in terms of product, in terms of technology with Germany. Germany pretty much owns the trade with China. That's not really going to change a lot. Japan is going to probably try to step in there with the sanctions, but I think the German-Chinese connection is going to remain solid. As I mentioned before in one of the earliest questions, London is going to establish the RMB Trading Center for currency trade, for bonds, and for more. And that's how London moves into the next decade.
So again, it remains a financial hub network.
It's certainly not a technology network.
Okay. Next question is from GlassFX. One of your colleagues, The Voice, once mentioned a White Dragon special op group known as the Gardeners. Is there any updates on the activities of this group?
Implicitly, yes, but not directly. I asked The Voice a couple months ago, and we had certain, personal conversations before Christmas. How's the family, and how's your business, and what are you up to? Where are you going to go travel? You heading home to Central Europe? Stuff like that. We got talking a lot, and I just slipped in. Hey, any news on the Gardeners? Any news on more conversion of the elite mid-level members in Europe, the United States, and London? And he said, Jim, a great deal of them, 90% have converted. And I can actually state that some have been killed off. And I said, the Gardeners at work. And he said, yeah, the Gardeners at work. I hear that there's a price on George Soros's head. Don't know about that in any way of a confirmation. Certainly it's justified. It's overdue. But he is their bitch. He is the errand boy, the fellow to put out in front of a microphone for the Western European elite cabal. And I think George Soros is going to be gone soon. Sometimes this is a very weird phenomenon. Sometime, like let's just say the Eastern White Hats, White Dragon White Hats, let's say they confront a powerful member in the Rothschild family and they say to him, we want you to kill Soros. We want you to get rid of him. We don't want any vengeance after the fact saying that the Chinese elite killed Soros and therefore we have to go kill some of yours in China. We want you, Rothschilds, to hire and take care of the Soros kill. And while you're at it, kill off Hillary. And that's how things get done. That's how it gets done clean. Because if a mid-level hit squad from Rothschild knocks off Soros and it becomes known, then it brings the rest of the Western mid-level players in line. And they're not even thinking about vengeance to knock off someone in Asia or China. They're not thinking that in those terms because it was done in-house. The cleanest gardening is done by your own gardeners. Very interesting. I don't know about any up-to-date report to make things very current, but believe me, I ask once in a while what the gardeners are doing. I need to ask more often. Okay, let's move on.
When and what is the peak for gold? Will we have to convert precious metals to fiat, or will banks accept straight trades for the real asset?
I don't know when the peak is for gold. I suspect in a few years. Could be 2 years, could be 4 years, could be 6 years. I don't know. Very difficult because I cannot anticipate the heavy criminal fraud done by the Western elite. I cannot anticipate all their criminal deeds. Therefore, it's very difficult to put timing on these things. But as for the peak, I think we're going to see several steps. I mentioned them before. You get rid of the COMEX and you work toward a market equilibrium and you're back to 3,000 gold. Okay, just think of the same sort of percentages, but a little bit more for silver. Then you work to resolve all the different claims that are on gold and all the different market fraud lawsuits, and you resolve all that and you're up to 5,000 gold. Then you work toward the gold trade note for commercial trade, and you work toward the currencies that are gold backed, and you work toward banks with their actual gold reserves, and that's how you get to $10,000, $12,000, and $15,000 gold. The peak, I think, is going to be something around $12,000 to $15,000 gold. That's my estimate, $12,000 to $15,000 gold. The peak for silver, Just divide by 25. So let me bring out my handy calculator here. If you got $15,000 gold and you divide by 25, you're at 600 silver. I think we're going to see at least a $400 silver price and probably closer to 500 or 600. That's peak, but I don't know when, because remember, the global currency reset was scheduled for January of 2014. We've had nothing but a crime scene since then. We've had QE to infinity, the Ukraine war, the Syrian war, which blocks the Iranian gas pipeline from joining Europe, and we've had an attempt at stealing an election for Hillary. I can't anticipate the entire crime scene. I can anticipate the event schedule. That's a Schwarzkopf term. I don't think he made it up, but during the Blitz for Iraq, what was that, 1990? During that Blitz, he was asked, well, when are we going to do this? When are we going to have this? He said, well, we're not on an events calendar. We're not on a timing calendar. We're on an event calendar. We're on an event schedule. When Baghdad falls, we're going to look to do this. When we secure the borders, we're going to look to do this. So event schedules. I look at the event schedule, returning to the gold standard and the installation of bank reserves with gold and the installation of gold trade notes for payment at the ports and the installation of gold currencies. Those three big elements are going to be happening, and in their rearview mirror will be the death of the COMEX with all the lawsuits. Remember, Donald Trump has already, this is what I've come to learn, I hope it's true, Donald Trump has ordered the initial steps for the U.S. government to do an audit of its gold reserves. It's going to be interesting. I wonder if they're going to show that Bush, Clinton, and Rubin stole Fort Knox and its 8,500 tons.
Okay, Jim, I'd just like to add an additional question aside, if you don't mind. It's regarding the ratios that you've described as being 25-1 for silver. That's the peak that you're anticipating silver to reach, while it's at its current stage of 69-1 today. You don't think silver can revert back to how it comes out the ground, closer to 10-1?
I just don't think so, because I think the main emphasis for the monetary metal will be gold.
Okay. So on to the next one.
But silver,
okay.
But silver has a different added advantage, that it's industrial use and consumption. We don't recover silver completely from its usage. You don't take all the cell phones out there and all the used personal computers and desktops and all the networking devices and recover the silver. It's recovered maybe 5 to 20%. So you're going to have more industrial demand for silver, but more monetary demand for gold. And I think the monetary demand gold is going to be gigantic. But I am assured 100% silver will be a monetary metal, and maybe platinum will be too. All right, let's move on. We just have a few more left.
This is from Christopher. Will the Fed get audited this year? And how does this affect the system?
Don't know. It could be that Trump has started this process. I would like to see this the case. And with the audit, I would like to see a more complete examination of the 0% lease policy begun by Robert Rubin in the Clinton administration. It'd be great to have a pathway. Where did that gold go? I don't want to speculate here.
The next one is from Paul. What is your opinion on the rumour that the US has approximately 2 million tons of undisclosed secret gold stolen and also in the ground at the Grand Canyon?
What's my opinion? The opinion is that's pure bullshit. The Grand Canyon might have significant deposits of gold. What I've heard is that in the last 15 years, there have been 2 or 3 extensions of the boundary of the Grand Canyon National Park to federalize its contents. You could say federalize its grounds and widen the fence, expand the fence. But what that does is expands the claims for its contents. I don't buy the argument that deep storage gold is easily accessible. By that I mean, if the United States government declared, okay, a lot of Nevada and Colorado and Idaho properties are going to be developed for its gold as quickly as possible, I think they might be able to produce a couple thousand tons in 5 to 10 years. That does not relieve the problem for the U.S. government in coming up with gold backing for its new currency. If I had to make a guess, I would say the Grand Canyon might contain, don't really know, might contain 5 or 10,000 tons of gold, might contain 2 or 3,000 tons of gold. I don't know. I don't know, and I suspect it's far less than what they tell you. Let's move on.
What do you think will collapse first? The European Union or the US petrodollar, and why?
The petrodollar, because it already collapsed in 2014. Just people haven't noticed. They haven't noticed because they couldn't really define what the petrodollar is. But the last piece to the petrodollar is what I believe to be $3 to $5 trillion worth of treasury bonds that operate as the core for the U.S. government Department of Treasury Exchange Stabilization Fund. And I believe part of the Arab deal that Kissinger cut as a Rockefeller agent. By the way, he suggested that the Arabs quadruple their oil price. It was not an Arab idea. The Arabs did not come up with the idea of quadrupling the oil price. They're not that clever, they're not that confrontational. It was a Rockefeller Foundation idea delivered by Kissinger to the Saudis with a promise that they could be 4 times as wealthy if they only promised to keep their surpluses locked in treasury bonds so there'd be no sale of dollars after payment for oil. And the Saudis went along with the second condition that they buy boatloads of U.S. military equipment, weapons. And that's what they're doing right now with the Yemen war, and that's what they're doing now to arm ISIS. Okay, so the European Union, I think, will fracture. And I think the Brexit vote is just the beginning of the lit fuse. You got to watch not just the Italian election, that was very interesting, but watch the French election coming up. I just spoke with a French-born client who lives in New York, and he told me a few days ago he does not think Maria Le Pen is going to win, but he thinks the socialists are going to be much, much weaker this time and may not collect the coalition majority. So it might not be a socialist-led coalition. And I said, well, doesn't that mean it's possible that it could be a populist-led coalition led by Maria Le Pen? He said, well, it's possible, but I just don't think they're going to get enough votes. It's going to be too fractured a coalition. All right, so worth watching in France. I want to see France overturn the socialists. I want to see Belgium overturn the socialists. I want to see Italy go its own way. And I've come to learn something. I'm afraid I'm a little bit, I don't want to use the word naive, but I didn't think this entirely through, and I'm not ashamed to admit my shortcomings. This is very complicated stuff. The Italians cannot abandon the euro without all countries in the EU abandoning the euro at the same time. That is a hypothesis that might be true. I'm looking to verify that. I thought the Italians could just go ahead, issue their own lira currency, devalue it, go on their merry way, stimulate their economy, write down some of their debt, bail out a lot of their banks, let some of them go down, and just break away from the European Union. Well, apparently it's not that simple. Apparently the euro is actually a collection of all those member nation currencies, and if the Italians back out of the European Monetary Union, namely the common euro currency, the Europeans that remain would have to rewrite their contracts, that includes financial market contracts, in order to exclude the lira in the weight, as in percentage, for all the different settlements. I'm talking about contract settlements. Okay, very complicated. The European Union is going to break down. It is going to break down, and so will NATO, the alliance, break down. The petrodollar has already broken down, and it's in a late stage.
Okay, Jim, this is the last question that we have for you today. And this comes from the Jim Stone website. Large drug stash found in the nose cone of American airline jet. 31 pounds of cocaine were found in the nose cone on an American Airlines jet that flew a route between Bogota and Dallas. This would mean that drug cartels have bought off airline maintenance crews and are using them to stash the drugs in maintenance-only areas of the planes. What's your thoughts?
My thoughts is that it means that we're in dangerous ground. The infiltration is far deeper than I knew. I knew about the Wall Street banks using heroin packets for overnight deposits, not for shipments to other countries to satisfy transaction requirements. I'm talking about Bank of America, Citigroup, J.P. Morgan using actual heroin as money in overnight deposits. I knew about how the Reagan yacht had been used regularly to go through the Panama Canal, holding at least 1 and as much as 2 tons of heroin. That was done by the Secret Service and Langley folks using the Reagan yacht, which was never inspected, therefore. But if we have transport in airlines, not all that surprising, but very disappointing. I notice another collusion. UPS is doing midnight runs to bring in hundreds per day of unvetted, illegal Arab Muslim immigrants. UPS, overnight. So lots of deals are being struck between the U.S. government, as corrupt as it is, and the private sector. Airlines are very vulnerable because they can move heroin and these illegal alien Arabs. So it's messy, very messy. I operate under a theory that for every one item you discover, there are 5 others. So they're probably on ships. Do you remember the Dubai World Port Facility ownership? The company was in a controversy. It was 2005 because Bush II began his administration, baby Bush, and I was asking the question, what on earth is Jack Snow doing as Treasury Secretary for the U.S. government when his experience was CSX Corporation and railroads and ports were the specialty for CSX at that time? And one of my clever colleagues said, Jim, do you think maybe there's a connection between the U.S. government and distribution of heroin and this ports controversy and acquisition? And I said, yeah, that makes sense. So Jack Snow was made Treasury Secretary to firm up all the connections for heroin shipments that would benefit the big banks. There's your bank connection. So if the big airlines are involved in transporting heroin for the Langley folks, not too surprising. We already know UPS is doing big favors shipping in the illegal, unvetted Arab Muslim immigrants. By the way, if you're wondering how many immigrants there are in the United States, 6 months ago it was 2.5 million. Illegal Arab Muslim immigrants. So big that it's now 10% of the Bowling Green, Ohio population. Now they're demanding both mosques and Sharia law. It's all part of the, can't think of the guy's name, 1897, the Zionist Conference. Pick laid out World War I, he laid out World War II, and he laid out World War III that is seeded by millions of Arabs across the Western world. He laid this out in 1897. So, 120 years ago, he laid out what we're seeing now. The elite are very patient in destroying our world.
Guys, if you want to educate yourself with this wealth of information, head over to thegoldenjackass.com, where Jim Willie is the editor of the Hat-Trick Letter.
Yes, it's www.goldenjackass.com. We have 154 months completed. There are 2 reports each month, the Global Money War Report and the Gold and Currency Report. I invite people to go to the website, goldenjackass.com, browse around, look around, sign up for the newsletter. You will not be disappointed.
Jim, thank you once again. That was a fantastic interview, and I hope the listeners really do appreciate your efforts. Thank you.
My pleasure.